Thank you for sharing that. Ambassador, can you comment on President Trump's tariff policies and the trade war or potential trade war, and how does China receive this?
Well, let me put it in a Chinese context. There is a short Chinese phrase which describes trade. It's 互通有无, to exchange what you have for what you don't have, or to get what you don't have by exchanging things for it. In the case of U.S.-China trade, China exports 3 times as many things to the United States as we do to China. President Trump regards this as a ripoff. I say it's a good deal. We're getting a great deal more than we're giving. And what's more, we're paying for what we get with little green paper portraits of dead presidents, which don't have any intrinsic value, and which, at the moment, given the tariff wars and the tariff tantrum and the erratic behavior of the United States, are in danger of losing their value. They have actually lost 10% of their value. And you can see the effect of the tariff tantrum, not only in the gyrations of the stock market, which all of us who are retired depend to some extent on through IRAs and other instruments, but also in the price of gold, in the opening battle between Chairman Powell and the Federal Reserve and the president. And this policy of tariffs, which assumes that by making it hard for people to invest in the United States and raising costs in the United States, we can somehow persuade them by not trading with us, they will somehow be persuaded to invest here. Doesn't work. Very few economists, if any, outside Peter Navarro, the advisor to President Trump on these matters, believe in this particular theory. If you doubt me, I invite you to ask anybody from one of the many universities in Boston to come before you and answer that question. Oh, one other thing. We have the White House claims that there are direct talks going on somehow with the Chinese. I don't believe it. I think what is happening is what I described earlier. The Chinese are maintaining contact with us, routine contact. There is no negotiation going on. The Japanese have just been in Washington, and their experience apparently was they went to talk to the American leadership on this matter, and the American leadership said, "What are you offering?" And the Japanese said, "Well, what is it that you want?" And the Americans could not explain what they wanted. This is a cockamamie approach to negotiation. And I think the Chinese, having observed the United States break virtually every agreement it has agreed to in recent years, including the replacement for NAFTA with proposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico, that was negotiated by Mr. Trump in his first term. And yet he felt free to abandon it and repudiate it. What's the incentive to negotiate with the United States when the United States has no stated objectives that make sense and no record of compliance with its own agreements? So I don't think there is. I think the Chinese have decided they will wait us out and see how Americans like Walmart and Amazon denude of products. 60% of Walmart's products originate in China. They're all tariffed.
And just to follow up on this topic, I'll read a question from the chat from our group member Quanta Dawn Light. She's asking, how are the tariffs going to affect trade deficit and U.S. debt levels?
They affect U.S. debt primarily because they generate inflation, and inflation raises interest rates rather than lowers them. This is the battle between Chairman Powell and President Trump. When you raise interest rates, you raise the increasing amount of money we have to pay on a national debt of about $37 trillion. When you continue to imagine that you can get by with modern monetary theory and pile up debt on debt, pyramid it, as I mentioned, you are adding to the burden on the American taxpayer for no gain. We don't pay as we go. We borrow $1.5 trillion just to keep the government going on the basis it is going, and not even to undertake new activities, which I would argue we need to do. So the tariffs have an indirect effect that way. They are not going to result in the reshoring of industry. And here I will just say that the entire theory that a loss of manufacturing jobs is the product of the Chinese, somehow attributable to them, it makes no sense. In fact, if you look at the trend in industrial employment, you will find that when China entered the WTO, the same trend continued. There was no change. U.S. exports, when China entered the WTO, continued to increase at the same level. What happened was that our trade balances shifted. But what we're talking about here is the same thing happening in industry that happened in agriculture. In 1900, 80% of American employment was on the farm. 15% was in the factory. 5% was in so-called services. The figure now is less than 1% in agriculture because we've mechanized agriculture. It's hugely capital intensive. And sadly, our farmers are now having as they lose their markets, foreign markets, as well as the $2 billion that U.S. Agency for International Development used to spend on behalf of humanitarian procurement of agricultural products, they are losing their equipment to the banks, which are repossessing it. And they're in danger of bankruptcy. Anyway, 1% in agriculture. Today, 8% in industry. Why? We actually produce more than we ever have, but we do it with fewer people. We have automated. And I think there's a further issue here, which is that the corporate management committees have no representation from labor in them, from the unions, or if there is a union, or the workers. And when they are confronted with serious competition, their first reaction is to cut labor costs by moving to Bangladesh or someplace where labor costs are cheaper. They don't do what the Germans or Japanese do, which is automate and retrain their workforce to become more productive with the automated equipment. And so we have 1% in agriculture or less, 8% in industry, and 91% in so-called services. I would argue that when you have a category that embraces 91% of economic activity, that category is essentially meaningless. But the fact is that category, with AI coming in, is about to see the same reduction in labor and increase in capital utilization that we've seen in agriculture and industry. So I think I'd urge you to have an economist talk about this, because I think we're economically illiterate or innumerate or something.